Thank you for the introduction. Hey everyone, I just want to say thanks for joining us today. As you heard, my name is Shah Selbe. I'm an explorer with the National Geographic Society and the founder of the Conservation Technology Development Lab that's called Conservify. So at Conservify, we really focus on designing and developing open source technologies around environmental monitoring, field science, and wildlife conservation. So this is work that's taken me and my team to rainforests in the Congo Basin, glaciers in Canada, islands in the Pacific, boiling rivers in the Amazon, floodplains of Botswana, and places like that. So, but for, as you heard, I started my career as a spacecraft propulsion scientist, but I have, for the last decade, I've been researching and building and deploying technology innovations for conservation. So it's a field that we like to call conservation technology. And it's really taken off in NGOs and field programs and universities and communities across the globe. It's kind of what we're here to talk about today. So the core of it is trying to focus all the incredible innovations that we see on a daily basis, things like smartphones and internet technology, satellite technologies, into one of the most time-critical issues today, and that's our rapidly changing and often deteriorating environment. So it's through that work that I'm helping to advise XPRIZE on what I think is going to be their most environmentally impactful challenge to date. So if you don't know much about XPRIZE, they're a foundation that runs large-scale incentivized competitions to enable breakthroughs and accelerate the future. So you might have heard of the Ansari XPRIZE, which really largely launched the private space industry. But they've been running and awarding different prizes in different areas for over 2 decades. So before joining as an advisor to this prize, I also served as a judge on the Ocean Discovery XPRIZE that really aimed at mapping autonomously the ocean floor. But today we're here to talk about the most recent prize that XPRIZE has launched, and that's the Rainforest XPRIZE. So this is a $10 million global competition that's challenging innovators across the globe to develop novel new technologies that can rapidly survey rainforest biodiversity and then use that data to deliver new insights. These insights will help to promote the health and conservation of this very diverse, very complex, and very threatened ecosystem. So if you'd like to know more, there's an upcoming webinar. You could see the information on the screen there that can answer a lot of questions that you might have about the Rainforest XPRIZE. But you can also visit rainforest.xprize.org to find out more information if you're interested in competing or you just want to see more details about that. So firstly, I would like to start by introducing you guys to an incredible group of people. The panelists that we have today are absolute experts in their fields, and they can provide a lot of important context and information around the issue of rainforest conservation and how technology can help. So I'm super excited about this discussion today with these brilliant folks. So the 3 people are Kevin Njabo, who's the Africa director at the UCLA Center for Tropical Research at their Institute of the Environment and Sustainability. So I'll let Kevin talk for a little bit, and then I'll introduce you to the other speakers before their short presentations.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Shah. I'm excited to be here today to talk about what we're doing at the Congo Basin Institute and really how we can use breakthrough technologies to save the rainforest. The question is, can we actually use it? And I say yes, absolutely. Technologies might be the only tools that we have at our disposal now to actually save the rainforest and actually the health of our climates. So we actually know that about 30% of the world's land forest, the world is covered by forest. And since the 1970s, about 178 million hectares of the forest have been lost. So this is roughly the size of the country of Libya. So that's a lot of forest that we're losing every day. And technology has profoundly shaped our society. It has shaped our economy and the environment. Although we also see on the other side, technology too has caused a lot of environmental social problems. But we know that when using breakthrough technology, it is key when we try to address environmental degradation, we try to address issues of climate change, food scarcity, waste management, and other pressing global challenges. So by technology, we try to look at those equipments which and the skills that are needed to perform every different activities. So we can use the soft technology like information, like our research within the field, the training and capacity building efforts we do, and the hard technology, which includes the equipment we use to carry out those different activities. So by breakthrough technologies, we also we mean here those environmentally sound technologies that are used, that should be able to protect our environment, that should be less polluting, that should be they use our resources in a sustainable way and recycle waste and our products. So technology is viewed today, it's really fundamentally changing the way we live, the way we work, the way we relate to one another and to the external world. So, but let's be very, very clear on this. No human technology can actually replace nature's technology, which has been perfected for over hundreds of millions of years in delivering the key services that are used to sustain life on Earth. So our forests, our rainforests are usually considered as our natural libraries. They are our natural lungs of the Earth. So a productive, diverse natural world and a stable climate, they've been the foundation for the success of our civilization and will continue to be so in the future. So one of the fundamental issues of technological revolutions is the lightness with which we have taken for granted the health of our natural ecosystems, like our forest, like our oceans, like our river basins, which are all underpinned in what we call today biodiversity. So I'm just going to use a very few examples of what we've been doing at the Congo Basin Institute and how technology has been used to save the forests of the Jah River Basin. So can you see my slide now? Sure, I can't get my screen to share. Okay, so I'm sorry about that. So I'm just going to use a few examples of what we've been doing in the Congo Basin. So, and the Congo Basin Institute is where we use Africans to be the greatest change agents in Africa. And we do this simply by providing a model that protects and restores our rainforests and providing that hub for conservation research and integrating that knowledge and input from the local people. So our mission at the Congo Basin Institute is try to find these integrative breakthrough solutions that conserve the environment and meet the needs of the developing world. So a few examples of what we've been doing to date has been, for example, tracking long distance movements of hornbills. And we know that hornbills are one of these frugivorous birds that alone disperse 35% of tree species within the Central Africa. So we use we can track these hornbills using HAkA satellite transmitters, and in such a way that we understand the ecology of the species, when we have very healthy populations, and we can also use these technologies to model the forest structure so that can predict the movements of these different hornbill species within the forest. And in doing that, we can also use, we can create these 3D seed shadows that characterize the movement behavior of the different species. And we know that once we have healthy populations, every time we talk about seed dispersers, once the populations of the seed dispersers are healthy, the trees, the seeds deposition are actually taken away from the mother tree. So but once the population is hunted out, most of the seeds fall very close to the mother tree and they rot and die. So we can actually track that using our different type of technologies. Clearly, we can do that using in defining the different strata of the forest. We can look at the species that characterize the canopy species. We can look at the middle canopy. We can look at the shrub layers, all the different seed dispersers, and it can characterize the rainforest. We've been tracking hornbills across Central Africa for the last couple of years, and these regions, what we clearly see that we know where the hornbill species had during lean periods where they can go to, and we can get the range, the complete range, and estimate the range size of hornbill species within the tropical region. And so that has helped us clearly to understand where they go and how the health of the forest can be maintained. The other thing that I will try to talk about is environmental DNA. Environmental DNA actually has a very great potential, not just in monitoring the common species, but to genetically detect and identify other existing species within our region that could be very, very important in influencing our conservation efforts. And so environmental DNA allows us to monitor without requiring the collections of living organisms, and creates that ability to study them in their natural environment. So the species that are invasive, the ones that are elusive, the ones that are endangered, we can actually study them without having to introduce humans into the forest and stress the environment. So using environmental DNA, we can have access to genetic information that is very critical in helping us to understand population sizes, species distributions, population dynamics, and as well as even tracing the history of all the species that have existed in this area for a very, very long time. So when we collect the species from different areas through environmental DNA, we can get back and reconstruct the forest and see what has been there, what is threatening the forest, without having any human physical presence in the forest that can cause stress with the environment. So we've been running lots of different projects that also use tech to inform policy and the health of our forest. So we can go during the Q&A session, we can talk about the different projects which we've been doing, and each of these projects have a technological aspect. So I can just give you a short list of the Ebony project, the Central Biodiversity Alliance, our pangolin projects, predictive modeling of emerging diseases, climate change, and others. So we can talk about that as we move into the Q&A session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kevin. That was super interesting. I'm going to introduce our next speaker, and then we'll go into Q&A after everyone's done. So the next speaker is Jorge Ahumada, who is Executive Director of Wildlife Insights and Senior Scientist at Conservation International.
Thank you, Shah. It's really glad to be here with all of you and with this amazing panel. And let me start by trying to share my screen. Hope it works. All right, let me know if you can see my screen. Perfect. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about technology, rainforests, and conservation. I spent the last 15 years of my life working in conservation, and with frustration, I've seen how difficult it is to get good data for many of the species that we study. And there is hardware that has been developed, over the last 10 years or so that is now affordable, in the way of camera traps, acoustic recorders, and all that kind of stuff. But we still have a huge amount of work to do in order to bring all that data to understand it and to share it. So, for example, camera traps has been the focus of my work, and camera traps are everywhere. We published a study, a few years ago trying to attempt a count, but it's difficult to know. We know there's millions of images out there, thousands of projects working with camera trap data, but that data is never or seldom used in conservation. There's a few projects that do it, but is rather the exception than the norm. And so we thought, as a conservation organization and as a group of scientists, why is that? And there's basically these barriers. It's very difficult to use to process the data. The data flow is very slow. Once you have the data somewhere, you probably will store it in your hard drive and maybe in the cloud, but the data is siloed and no other person can see their data, so it's not shared. And then you do need to know quite a bit of technical details in order to gain insights from this data in terms of analyses and statistical modeling. So that's a major barrier also, especially for people that are non-technical and want to use camera trap data for conservation. So the solution for us was to think, how do we bring down these barriers and create things that create a new platform that can actually solve this problem for the globe. And the first thing is just basically create software that is 10 times better in terms of just managing all the imagery that comes in, getting it there, and then making it very easy to look at those data. And we've been working to use AI for that, which has improved many times the speed at which we can analyze this data. The second is to put all this data in a modern platform. So even though the user the data, it belongs still to the person who collected it, it can be shared and using cloud tools and using modern licensing approaches like the Creative Commons license. So once it's up there, then you can see, other people can see their data, and you can share it in different ways, in the way that you're most comfortable with. And then one of the most important things is to get insights from this data. It doesn't matter how much data we have. If we don't understand what the data is telling us, then we haven't done anything. So create tools so that this data at least can be understood quickly, and you can always download the data, and you can always do more deep analyses on it, but get some basic insights into the data right away. And so that's how we created this platform called Wildlife Insights. The idea is to maximize the potential of camera trap data, but also other sensor data that is out there, like acoustic data, and Kevin was mentioning eDNA data. It's all presence-absence data that can be used to better understand what's happening with wildlife and biodiversity currently. And Wildlife Insights is a partnership of many organizations. Conservation International is leading the partnership, but there's all these other organizations, including Google, who has donated a lot of its time and expertise in order to help create this platform. And these are the key features. I don't want to bore you with many of the details, but we have artificial intelligence module that identifies about 614 species and going up. We have a data input and management section where you can upload data in different ways. We have ways to collaborate so that people can share their data, create initiatives, share them independently with others. We safeguard the locations of all endangered species, and we don't share images of people. There's a possibility of embargoes, private data download, and other things like that. And most importantly, analytics. Basic statistics, operational statistics from your camera trapping project, but also basic analytics from the species, the occupancy, the abundance, the activity budgets of the species, community-wide analytics, the possibility of generating reports, and also spatially explicit products that are derived by modeling. So, the vision is that, one of these days, you can go into any place in the world and you can see this data or a model from this data that shows the extent of a species and how does that change over time. So if we could do this in rainforests, this would be fantastic, because it will provide protected area managers, scientists, and other working in these places for a way to really understand what's happening there. So that's all I want to say. If you're interested in wildlife insights, contact us at this email. And I mean, it is an important, in the context of a Rainforest Prize, it is important that we think together of how to create common tools that can be used by everybody, rather than deriving, individual tools, each of us. And I think that in the spirit of that collaboration, we should be thinking about open source code, open tools, and open data. And because these are big problems we're dealing with in conservation, and the only way we're going to solve them is we get a lot of data together and use it for the common good. So thank you again, Shah, for the invitation, and happy to take any questions later on.
Great, thank you, Jorge. That's very interesting work that you guys are doing at Wildlife Insights. I'm excited to talk more about it. Okay, so our last speaker is Farwiza Farhan. She's the founder and chair of the NGO HAkA that's working on environmental issues in Aceh, Indonesia, and an advisory board member of the Women's Earth Alliance. So I'll let her take it away.
Thank you so much, Shah, for the opportunity and for the introduction. Just to reintroduce myself again, yes, I felt like I'm the only woman in this panel, but it's great that we have Anushka as the initial host. But I might have slightly different realities to present than the initial two presenters that have brought a lot of hope on how technology could help conservation causes. So I'm gonna share my screen in a minute to introduce you to the landscape where I'm working. So I happen to work in a place called the Loiser ecosystem in northern tip of Sumatra, and it's a 2.7 million hectares of relatively intact forests and the last in the world. And it's the last place on earth where rhino, tiger, elephant, and orangutan still roam together in the world. The most amazing thing about technology and this landscape is, for us, we see technology catalyze a lot of things. Technologies like Google Voyager have enabled us to bring the rainforest closer to the publics. There's also technology that have helped us monitor the rainforest to see the deforestation rate, to see if there is illegal logging taking place, to see natural disaster taking place. Technologies like, of course, GIS and remote sensing and drone technology that bring monitoring, making monitoring a lot easier. And then on top of that, there's also technologies that we also use to monitor wildlife a lot closer. Technologies like elephant collaring that would enable us to see where the elephants are and the potential for human-wildlife conflict, and in any ways that we can to coordinate the response to prevent the human-wildlife conflict from taking place. And then, of course, the technology that Jorge mentioned and everyone is using, like camera trap and smart patrol. In addition to that, we see the destruction in places like the Loiser ecosystem, pristine rainforests continue to take place. And this is a sad reality, but we're also seeing the realities of our work on the ground. Currently, most of the Loiser ecosystem is largely underexplored and inaccessible. So the rangers who are patrolling this ecosystem need to do so on foot and often in a dangerous situation. We have heard on how rangers are one of the most risky jobs out there. Similar to many places in Africa, rangers in the Loiser ecosystem have facing threat not only from poachers and illegal loggers, but also from natures. So accidents have happened, rangers have been swept away. And in times like this, we wish the rangers would be wearing the kind of technology that could be saving their life. a lot of the work that these rangers are doing are still done manually. Removing snare traps to be done manually. Finding them is also done manually. Although there are camera traps that is placed on the entrance of the forest with the hope that we could detect poachers before they come in, they don't always work. In reality, there is a gap between the technology that we have and the response that we are getting from that technology. So this is a picture of one of our partner organization, the Loiser Conservation Forum, working together with law enforcement agency to use the monitoring tools. In this picture, we're using drone to show them that, yes, we can see that there's illegal logging taking place, and sometimes, yes, we can see that there are wildlife removal taking place. But this type of work is a meeting emerging between advocacy and campaigning and changing the political economy on the ground using technology. So it's awesome that there's currently more global and tech interest on protecting the rainforests, but we must not forget the realities on the ground. So thank you. I hope that helped clarify a little bit the challenges that we are facing. In my perspective, there is so much more that we could do to catalyze the use of technology to actually protect rainforests. Sometimes we come with a false assumption because a lot of us come from a background of biology and ecology, and we love the rainforest and we want to protect it. And oftentimes we come with the assumption that the rest of the world share our views, and it doesn't always true. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I think now we're going to bring back all the panelists, and we're going to have a little bit of a panel discussion amongst everybody. All the presentations were great, so thank you all for the great work that you do and for sharing it with us today. The first question is going to kind of build on what we heard we were talking about. I'm very interested to hear from all of you about what you see as some of the greatest challenges that are facing rainforest conservation today, and that could be, locally, regionally, globally. It could involve things like, government issues on the ground, technology promise. So I'll just open it up. Whoever wants to talk first can go ahead.
Okay, I can go first. Can you get me, Shah?
Yes, we can hear you and see you. Go ahead.
Okay. Most of our work is based in the Congo Basin, and so one of the biggest challenges we have is really making sure how do we tap local knowledge and make sure we can really build that capacity. So there is that continuous flow of information from research to the local people who live and understand the forest very well. So is one of the major challenges we've always had is how do we make sure we have enough capacity to continue the work. So not just parachuting in experts from the West to take care of the environment and tell them what to do, but make sure we can also tap enough local information and document that effort to see, because those people have been living in that forest for millennia. They understand very well the ecology of the system. They know really what is going on. How do we translate that information into modern science and make sure they also have that capacity to develop and sustain themselves while taking care of the environment?
Yeah, that's a really great point. Jorge, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to point out that Farwiza gave us like a very clear, case in which technology still has a way to go, and this is in the field of rapid response to threats. Camera traps and acoustic sensors, they all work well to collect data that can be processed and used for monitoring of long-term trends or things like that. Presence, absence of species. But when you're monitoring threats, you need immediate response. And in that, we're severely handicapped. I mean, first of all, the rainforest and tropical areas in general, they are antithetical to technology. It's the hardest environment you can put technology to work in, with high humidity, high heat, constant rain or lots of rain most of the year. and then you're placing something there that that has a chip, you know, the likelihood that it's going to fail is pretty high. And anything that you protect is going to be bulky. So all those things, you know, now combined with the ability to communicate between devices. So IoT functionality in the rainforest is difficult because there's in many places, these places are far away, these places are inaccessible to networks, and it's hard to get things to communicate. So if you need rapid response, you're going to be delayed by that. And so I think that's a major thing. And maybe the other thing, kind of touching a little bit upon what Kevin was saying, is that we do need to incorporate technology into the kind of the local people's livelihood as a way for them to use it as a tool for their own purposes. So it's not as like, it's not just us coming and, you know, with this wonderful stuff and putting it there. No, what can you as a local person, how can you benefit from this technology for your own livelihood? And give that a lot more thought, because sometimes what we want is not exactly what people on the ground want, and actually scale it up to different kind of community level or regional level. Like, what does the regional government want, and what does the community want, and how can technology help bridge that gap, if at all? But I agree. I mean, we still have a lot of challenges to go through, and I think that's one of the motivations of the Rainforest Prize is to fill some of those gaps, and I hope that can help on that.
Yeah, I think that's a great transition to what I wanted to ask next. So as we think about this Rainforest XPRIZE, what do you think some like solutions or the entries that would be most successful in solving some of these challenges? And maybe we'll start with you, Lisa. As you think about like what those challenges are, what are the solutions that you actually need to try and solve them?
My experience in conservation are actually very limited to a landscape in the Loiser ecosystem. So I am not gonna claim knowledge over every other landscape in the world. But what appear to be some of the most important consideration in creating this type of technologies, of course, it's inclusivity and the local context. Like, for example, we attempted piloting the sort of like tools, an app to help with law enforcement a few years ago. It's called Open Data Kit. The idea is to crowdsource the data and information that law enforcement official could then use in making sure that the forest is protected. But the barrier that we did not see coming was the fact that to upload pictures require mobile data that is not always available, and those mobile data needs to be purchased, and the cost to purchase those mobile data could be equals to a day or 2 days salary. So it's a massive disincentive for people on the ground to be purchasing mobile data instead of purchasing food. So those are the kind of like trade-off that would be amazing if we could think about that when we design this kind of technological intervention.
Thank you. What about you, Kevin or Jorge? What do you think about what sort of solutions are very sorely needed to try and help us through these issues?
I think the first thing is we just need to simplify it. Because at times when people talk about breakthrough technologies, they always think you just need to use drones or use LiDAR and just go and make it so complex, especially in systems that are very simple. So I try as much as possible to look at soft technology, which is just information, research, training, capacity building, and then the hard technology, that's the equipment that we use to try to translate that technology into policy. So if we look at it that way, then I think then we could have simplified versions of how we can really implement technology and informing ourselves on how to save our forest. So I try as much as possible to make the less complex it is, because there are so many simple ways in which when we tap, especially from local knowledge, what they do, how it is documented, how it has been saved, what they've been doing for millennia. One of the things that is really helping us now, especially in the face of the current COVID-19 pandemic, is to really understand the local people within the Congo Basin forest. We've seen that infection rates are the lowest in those areas. We don't even have, when we go back into the Congo Basin, really from the indigenous peoples who have zero infection from those areas. What really are they using and how are they reacting? What natural resources are they getting out of their environment, and how do they make sure that that can help inform the bigger picture? So if we take it, if we cut it down, looking at the basics, then I think we might get breakthrough solutions to saving our forest.
Great, Jorge. Do you have any thoughts on this?
No, I mean, I think everything's been said, but I mean, I think it's important to listen to the users and to listen to what the problems are, and not design from the top down, but design from the bottom up. You know, when we were thinking about wildlife insights, we were fed up with the way we were having to manage our camera trap data using Excel sheets, and then we found out a lot of other people were frustrated. So we designed something that was like solving a common problem. And so I think it's important to find that balance where you listen to the problems in the field, you try to find the common denominators. What are what are the recurring problems, and then think of the solutions that way, rather than coming in with a lot of data like here's all the data in the world. Well, is that going to solve any problem for you? So very user driven, and a lot of research in the ground to really understand what the remaining problems are is what I would kind of want to add to this discussion.
Okay, great. I have a question about data. So if we're able to gather all this amazing data about what's actually happening, and part of the Rainforest XPRIZE is looking both at kind of the assessment of rainforest biodiversity and also the collection of insights based off of that. So the idea behind insights is that we can take the data that we collect and we can create some information that's actionable or that can be provided to governments and things like that. So everybody on the panel, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts about what you think about what happens after we have all this data and how that data can get into the hands of people who can actually do something with it.
Okay. The first thing is scientists have to learn how to communicate and make sure every data we analyze and we collect should be translated into policy documents which policymakers can easily read and understand. So we have to break it down in such a way. So I'll always go back to our field sites and what we do. So when we're studying the health of the forest, like the question goes back is, can breakthrough technologies save the rainforest? I said absolutely. It depends on how we collect and translate that data and send that data through policymakers in the way they can understand. When we look at the health of the forest, when we studied our hornbills, we realized that hornbill species alone, they are responsible for dispersing 35% of the local tree species within Central Africa. So if you hunt those species out of the forest, then we just understand, just seed shadows. Just look at how far the seeds are dispersed from the mother tree that they rot and die. So when we understand the difference, the different seed dispersers and the health of that population, then we can collect the data of how many hornbill species are there, how many elephant species are remaining in the forest. That gives policymakers already an insight of really how the forest is faring. So that all that data, if we can just collect the data and translate it in such a way that policymakers can easily understand, then that's a huge step to solving each of the problems.
I'd like to add a little bit. Sorry.
No, go ahead, Farwiza, please.
Yeah, I'd like to add a little bit into that. In addition to communicate to policymaker, we also need to communicate those data to the economists, because a whole lot of information and value that we know of about the rainforest, it's simply, it's not that we don't know the value of rainforests really, but we are not capitalizing it in ways that it's keeping the forest standing. So I would argue for the translation of data and information to those who understand the economic systems. So please, Jorge.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good point. I was going to say something similar, but it's not just the value. I mean, the economic value of forests is the connection of those forests to human life and rainforest plays a vital role globally, as carbon stores, as air purifiers, as generation of drugs and all kinds of new things that are in the forest. So trying to link that to human well-being, I think, is really important. But back to your question, Shah, about what would we do with all this data? The first thing I thought about was, when 100 years ago people started collecting climate data across the world using climate stations, nobody really didn't know what would that data be used for. In a way, they collected the data just because they wanted to have information about the local climate and maybe be able to make good forecasts about weather regionally. But nobody could forecast, oh, we're gonna do this because the climate is going to change or because temperature is going to go up. And so having monitoring systems in place is a way to detect problems before they happen. And of course, in the climate scenario, we've known for a while now, for many years, that the temperature is rising and all these things are happening. And then the political action has not followed through. So it is kind of frustrating because we have all the data in the world. What else do you want? And still it's not working. But it doesn't mean that we don't have the evidence. We can have the evidence for biodiversity in a similar way. We need a sentinel system for rainforests that is similar, that tells us where things are happening before they become a problem. It's kind of a proactive approach. If you know hotspots that are where species are starting to decline before they become endangered or before IUCN categorizes them as critically endangered, let's try to prevent those things before they happen. And that can happen at a local scale if the change is local, or it can happen at a regional scale or national scale. So the audiences would be different. But I mean, it's creation of all kinds of different analytics from the data that will help understand better what to do in the different contexts where they happen.
Great, thank you very much. I think we have time for just one last quick question. I'm actually going to ask Farwiza this question. I want to hear more about your work with local communities and indigenous groups, and talk a bit about why that's so important. I know we heard a little bit about that from Kevin earlier, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Thank you for this honor. Well, we work closely with the local community within and around the lizard ecosystem, largely because they are on the front line of conservation and they are the first to know when there's destruction that is taking place, and they're also the first to be receiving an impact. Recently, we launched the all-woman ranger group that would be protecting the lizard ecosystem. It's a pilot project. It's a small area, but these women are nothing like an image of rangers we often have in mind. They are not armed. They are mothers. They're before they become rangers, there was entrepreneur. They used to be engaging in multiple forest restoration projects. In addition to that, we are also working with indigenous leaders, those who preserve the knowledge of the rainforest in their minds and through generations. And we were working with them to catalog those knowledge and to reshare that in the education system. But more than anything, these people are the best advocate for change of policies. A lot of them are not connected through technology. Some of the villages that we work with only receive phone mobile access in the past year, and electricity also in the past 2 years. So our connections is quite manual, and because of that, we felt somewhat privileged to still to be able to access their knowledge before everything else start to come in and wipe out those understandings.
Great, that's amazing to hear. I think we're going to move on to a Q&A shortly, but we're going to bring Anushka back to lead us.
Thank you so much. Gosh, we are so lucky to have the power of technology to have you all with us. Shah, Kevin, Jorge, and Rita, thank you so much for your contributions. As Shah has just mentioned, we have a Q&A session kicking off to meet the speaker from 4 p.m. So you've got about 13 minutes to grab a cup of tea, stretch your legs, and get ready to share your questions over the virtual platform on Slido, the functionality there. This is the Planet Smart Cities and Space stage here on day 2 of CogX 2020. I'm Nursh. I'm so happy to be here to host you through today. We'll be back live here on this stream at 5 p.m. with Lord Rees, Catherine Courtney, former head of the UK Space Agency, the CEO, and Sarah Stewart-Johnson to talk about exploring Earth, Mars, and humanity. And then a little bit later on at 6 p.m., we'll be joined by NASA astronaut Christina Cook. So make sure that you bookmark all of these things in your schedule, and we very much look forward to seeing you again very soon here on the Planet stage. I will see you shortly.
Want access to more CogX videos? Subscribe now for free at cogx.co.